Hello, I'm Saurabh Sharma. I'm a second year student at Tuck School of Business and a fellow for the Center for Digital Strategies.
I've been with IBM for about, I think, 12 years. Before that, I worked for Anderson Consulting in Chicago, and then a small company that did flight simulator stuff before that out of college. And so my current role in IBM, I've had different roles in IBM. I've been in the consulting side, in their software business side, in their sales side of IBM. For the last couple of years, I've been internal to IBM in their Chief Information Officer group. And right now, I'm actually as stated, in their security organization, and I have responsibility for IT security associated with cloud computing and mobile computing, and some other elements of how we secure IBM's internal business itself.
As you described your work, a question which comes to mind is that as you see that the data is for the first time moving outside of the firms, outside of their own servers and going towards the third-party service providers. How do you see what kind of security and privacy concern does this raise?
When data goes outside of any enterprise, whether it be a cloud infrastructure or something that somebody calls cloud, or just a traditional kind of outsourcing arrangement that's existed for years, you simply have the same kinds of security questions that you'd have if the data was supposed to be inside your company. So the fact that it's outside your company simply means you need to ask those same questions to external providers that you need to ask internally. So one example challenge that exists nowadays is data privacy laws are very different in many countries, especially in many of the European countries. And so if you're outsourcing a particular data set that may have some personal information associated with employees or customers or something along those lines, if you're outsourcing that to a cloud service or whatever else it might be, you have to ask questions about where the data will actually reside to make sure that you're not going to break any data privacy laws in one country or another in Europe just because you happen to use a cloud service. So challenges like that are what come into play when you talk about using a cloud service or a third party.
How do you see that these security concerns are an opportunity as well as a threat to the overall business of the cloud for IBM?
I don't believe that security services or security becomes a threat to IBM. I think the security of cloud infrastructures is one way essentially that IBM is trying to differentiate its cloud services compared to other service providers. IBM has done the outsourcing and run the IT business for many companies, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies for years and years and years and decades. So they're essentially trying to bring that expertise to cloud-based infrastructures. I think the goal and the hope is that what comes with that is some of the education and some of the skills so that you don't make the mistakes you might make if you simply buy just the specific cloud service from another provider.
Still, we don't see a move towards a public cloud for the mission-critical data. We see that private clouds and hybrid clouds, these are the things which are being more propagated. Do you see this as being more of a security concern, or do you think that this is a transition phase wherein we are moving towards the big public clouds?
I don't know if there'll ever be public cloud models, and maybe ever is kind of a harsh term, but for a while, public cloud models that are really proven in terms of the virtualization technologies and services and capabilities wrapped around them that would make a company trust all their big systems to go there. A company's corporate ledger, a retail company's customer database with all the credit card information, those types of things. For large companies like that, I think it's going to be quite some time before they would trust a public cloud model to host those kinds of applications. Even in the cases of some private cloud models, I think companies are starting private cloud activities on maybe more important business systems, but not really their true mission critical, most important systems, their financial data, their most sensitive data. And in some cases that goes even beyond just a security question, because if you have a private cloud, internally you're trying to do that for cost efficiency. And if you move both kind of, sort of important applications and the most important applications to that cloud, well, you need to manage that cloud to like the highest order of magnitude. You need to manage the whole cloud like it's got the ultra sensitive applications in it, which essentially raises the cost of that cloud. So in some cases, companies may have more than one private cloud, so they can manage the different clouds at different security levels. But those are probably the two challenges.
And as we move towards cloud, the basic relationship between the customer and vendor is changing from providing just a workforce to manage their IT towards a more transaction-based services wherein they don't have to be bound to a particular provider. They are looking at they are looking at short-term contracts and looking towards saving their money. So how do we see that this is going to change the current relationship which exists between the customer vendors, the vendor selection process, and the kind of quality assurance which the vendors today have to provide?
There's two issues in the cloud space, right? One is there are still varying approaches to clouds, right? If you're talking infrastructure cloud or an application cloud or a platform cloud, there is the challenge of vendor lock-in, where the technologies used by different vendors are widely varying. Custom APIs, proprietary APIs. You develop an app, you develop a technology to a specific vendor's API, platform as a service, leverage their application with the APIs to it, or even leverage specific APIs to their infrastructure service. You may be locked in and have to port your app to move to another vendor. And so vendor lock-in is a consideration that comes into play with anybody considering clouds. And then I think on the flip side, there are some cloud vendors that are trying to use more open stack type of approaches, and then they would essentially be competing on quality of service, price points, and those types of things. There are pros and cons to each one of those, just like there's pros and cons to using open source software in a traditional model and and a vendor's software in a traditional model. So that same consideration, vendor lock-in, all of that, it's not really new. It's just sort of moved those same challenges into the cloud.
The promise of cloud computing from the start has been to reduce the working capital requirement for the customer, their total capital expenditure on the IT infrastructure. So when we look at it as a whole and the IT outsourcing industry, what kind of an opportunity or threat it is, because the overall expenditure is going to go down. That is what the technology promises. So what do we see is going to happen to the industry, and what kind of structure would it have going forward?
I don't know that it dramatically changes the overall capital used in the industry. There's probably some efficiencies if magically we were to remove all internal private servers and data center workload and just put it all in a cloud. There's probably some efficiencies because people typically run private infrastructures that aren't very cloudy. At a lower level of utilization in terms of server utilization and everything else, storage utilization. And if all of that just went into the cloud, sure, there'd be some efficiencies because there's a bit of a mixing. But fundamentally, clouds are just servers and storage and networking, right? And so if you put all that servers and storage and networking in a cloud, you still need a large amount of hardware, right? You, in fact, need probably even higher speed, larger servers, in some cases more expensive servers to be able to do what you're doing in the cloud. So I don't know that it changes sort of the industry in terms of the hardware and the capital needs. I think it's kind of like you still have the bubble, you still have the balloon, which has got all the costs in it. You're just squeezing it around so the the balloon's popping out in different sides.
Thanks, Bill. With this, we come to the end of the interview. On behalf of the Center for Digital Strategies, I really want to thank you for being with us here today. We really value the thoughts and the insights which you gave us. This has been Saurabh Sharma for the Center for Digital Strategies. Thank you very much.